All right, welcome to Sharks Talk 916, episode 15, where if we called the last one Doom and Gloom, we're calling this one Hope Springs Eternal, because there's quite a turnaround from the last time that we saw you. So we went from less than 500 to the Sharks winning 6 games in a row, looking tonight to make it 7, which is a pretty amazing turnaround, really, considering where we were. There were a lot of personnel changes, although we'll talk about one big one, obviously. But pretty exciting stuff, Nolan.
Yeah, no, it definitely I wasn't gonna say a complete 360, but I've learned it was a 180, not a 360. Otherwise, we'd be back at the same place that we started, right?
Yeah, let's not do a 360.
I believe that's how math works. But no, it's been a complete 180 from, like you said, doom and gloom to full of hope, although they're starting to show signs of fracture the last couple of games, which we'll talk about. But yeah, quite the turnaround. I mean, if they ever needed to win 6 games in a row, this was the time to do it. I remember last show, telling you basically they got to win 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10, and string a couple stretches together like that. Apparently they decided, nope, we're just going to do it in one streak and get it out the window. Hopefully they can win again tonight, so they have one game of breathing room above 500, because if they lose tonight, they're right back under 500. But, I mean, if you look at the Pacific Division standings, I mean, they're not in a playoff spot yet, but, I mean, they've put themselves within 2 to 3 points of, teams like Vegas, Anaheim, and Calgary. The only teams that really have separation from them currently are really Edmonton and Vancouver to a lesser extent, and Arizona to a lesser extent.
Yeah, I mean, the West is tight, right? So the Sharks are third from the bottom, or tied for third at the bottom in the West as a whole, but it's a pretty close run, right? There's a couple teams at 22, a couple teams at 23, they're at 20. So it's definitely, or 21, sorry. So like literally a win tonight, depending on what happens with other teams, could put them pretty close to a playoff spot already, which it's early in the season. So I don't want to get, just like I didn't want to get too depressed last week, I don't want to get too overly excited this week, but I definitely feel like we were pretty big downers last week. And yes. So we're going to be very positive this week, I think, at least.
I can't make any promises, but
I would be
more so than our last show. Yes, for sure.
But I think it's proof again that the Sharks listened to our podcast because they heard the doom and gloom and they decided to turn it around and really play better. So we're probably the most important podcast you can listen to if you're a Sharks fan.
Fun fact, by the way, I'll do a trivia question for you. You may not know this. Some of our viewers may. But there is a current Shark that has a YouTube channel. Do you know who that is and what it's about?
Is it Vlasic and Dogs?
No, but that would be a good suggestion for sure. It is a defenseman.
Dylan
Ferraro
has a YouTube.
He does like a tech blog. He reviews like products like iPads and iPhones and stuff. So he's pretty good at it too. So check it out.
We should hook up. Considering we both come from a tech background, maybe we should reach out to Ferraro, see if we can get him on our show. And we'll go on his show and talk tech.
I watched a couple of them. Looks like he films a lot of it in the hotel on the road. So pretty funny.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'll have to check it out. Normal introduction. Sharks Talk 916. I'm Chad. With me as usual is Nolan. We're brought to you guys by Sports Talk 916. You guys can check it out on sportstalk916.com or check us out on Facebook and Sports Talk 916 Network. And then on Twitter, you can actually follow Sharks Talk 916. That's the important one. That's where Nolan and I do most of our posting. We don't really post on Facebook or the blog a lot right now. Because those things take a lot more time than just tweeting something during a game.
The world revolves around 140 characters or 340, whatever it is now.
Yeah. So Steve, our longtime listener, I guess, I think he's our most devout listener. He said that it was the fact that he built a puck angel that turned the Sharks around, not our show. I'll tell you what, Steve, we'll split credit on that one. So you get half credit and we get half credit.
I'm going to need to see proof of this puck angel.
It was on the Shark Attack page. It was pretty cool. Yeah,
I'll have to check it out.
He definitely built a puck angel. for those who don't know who Steve is, if you're listening and you don't know this guy, he has the biggest collection I've ever seen, I think, of sharks and shark-related memorabilia. He runs a cool Facebook page, and he's just a cool guy all around. So, yeah, we give shout-outs to him all the time. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple things today. So let's talk about the turnaround. We're talking about kind of the keys to success in the last few games. A few lingering concerns you and I have. The kind of what's going on with Barracuda and the fourth line shuffle that's going on with the Sharks, and then a little preview of tonight's game. So let's jump in with just the turnaround in general. So 6 straight wins: Chicago, Minnesota, Nashville, Edmonton, Anaheim, and Detroit. Couple decent teams in there, a couple not so great teams. What to you was the most impressive win of those 6, and why would you say so?
Well, 5 of the 6 wins were at home. The only road game was Anaheim, which they didn't play particularly well in that game, so I won't say that was the most impressive. The other sort of trend in these wins is most of these were against teams that going into the year you wouldn't have expected much from. Edmonton has turned out to be a good team, which we will play again tonight, but going into the season, the best team on paper that they beat of those 6 is Nashville. Nashville is actually out of a playoff spot currently, but I still feel like that was the most impressive win to me because on paper they have the best roster. And if you watched that game, it felt like a playoff game. It was a tight, checking, low-scoring game, which, considering the issues the Sharks have had the last year and a half with goaltending and goals against, to win a tight checking game against a good, playoff quality opponent was impressive. They ended up having to go to a shootout in that game, which naturally you would look at that and tend to not take as much gratitude out of it, but just the way they played throughout that game. And then in the shootout, Martin Jones was 7 for 7, which was ridiculous. And I think it was Timo that finally broke the net, Hyman will say. Nobody was about to score.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody's heard that on this podcast before, but that is a saying that we used to say.
I thought better of it and then said it anyway. So
yeah,
my apologies.
Whatever. It's a thing we say, usually in private where other people can't hear. But
right.
Yeah, I agree. I think Nashville to me was the most impressive game, mostly because I feel like it was the most solid game they had. Right? I mean, just regardless of who they were playing, watching them on the ice, they looked the best out of any of their games, I think, or pretty much any of their games. But I do think that it's good to look at, there's a number of games where they got behind by a goal, right? And a couple where we didn't score first, and they were able to come back and score, which is something that we've seen sometimes the Sharks, once they get behind, they just kind of mope around and don't do a great job. They've been good about finding a way to win regardless of what the score looks like at any given time.
Yeah, and I think Randy on the broadcast against Detroit called that out, that I believe the Sharks and Detroit were essentially the 2 worst teams in the NHL in terms of giving up the first goal so far this season. So that game was kind of a test of, well, who's going to give it up? Sure enough, Detroit did. But the Anaheim game, I think, speaks to what you were saying. They were behind at least twice in that game, maybe 3 times before they eventually
twice. So and hurdle both times, which was good to see. I think that was a big. We're going to talk a little bit about keys to success, but not that Hurdle been quiet, but he hadn't been scoring a lot, and I think that him, he gets the first goal and the second goal in the Anaheim game. So both times that we were behind, he scores to pick them back up. So
and in those 6 wins, I mean they had a fair amount of games where they jumped out to huge early leads. Minnesota and Edmonton primarily. Chicago, they were up 3-0, but that's not a huge lead. It was just early that they got the lead. Edmonton, they got out 3-0 in the first. I think Minnesota, they put up 4 the first, if I remember right. So
yeah, Minnesota was a bit ugly to me, just because of that. We went from being 4-0 to winning 5-6. So I'm not sure I was ever super worried about it, because a lot of the 3 of the goals come from Minnesota in the third period. But you hate to see that, right? I think that's one thing if we kind of jumping a little ahead to our need to work on column. I think playing when we're ahead, we seem to play very well from behind. We need to work on playing when we're ahead a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, and it's gotten better. So I guess I can't really say it's gotten better the last 2 games, because both the Anaheim and Detroit games were pretty tight. But maybe they'll get another chance tonight to protect the lead, hopefully. But what I was going to say is going back to that Anaheim game, the big sort of scare that came out of that game was Hurdle's injury, right? Hurdle goes down late in the third period. Of course, per Sharks protocol, they don't provide any update after the game. Replay shows his knee was tweaked pretty, I would say significantly, but it didn't look good, to say the least, especially considering his history of knee injuries. But thankfully, he didn't miss the Detroit game. Wasn't particularly great in the Detroit game, so hopefully it's not impacting him, but at least he's in the lineup. And I don't know about you, Chad, but if I had to identify one Shark who is the most irreplaceable on this current team, it would probably be Hurdle for me.
I mean, yeah, I picked him last year as my number one forward, right? And I think this year I feel kind of the same way about him. Even when he's not scoring, he's there. He's in the mix. He's creating chances. He's definitely someone they can't afford to lose, especially not with, if you look at the way Timo's playing right now, and the way Logan was playing prior to this streak. I think, Hurdle was kind of the workhorse, the guy you needed to have around. And I saw an article that I didn't read the article because I was busy today, but I saw a headline that was basically like reasons why they can't afford to have Hurdle gone. Right. And I mean, it's true. I don't think the Sharks can't afford that. To me, that's the first line right now. I know technically he's on the second line, but to me, that's the number one line.
It is.
And I think he, as center, is the heart of that line. I don't think you can lose him.
Well, and that's what I'll say. The fact he's a center is huge. So him and Logan are irreplaceable because of that. If either one goes down, Joe Thornton is your second line center, Gambrell's your third line center, and then they probably have to force Goodrow back into fourth line center. Not that I'm never going to criticize Joe Thornton because he's Joe Thornton, but he's not anywhere near what he used to be, and he's not off to a good start this year. So you don't want him as a second line center at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, he's not as fast or physical now as Hurdle is, right? Hurdle's a power forward the way he goes
he
in.
just can't handle that amount of minutes at
that too.
This stage of his career. So.
Interesting. Some interesting reading on Thornton too. I thought about his spa days. I don't know if you saw that article at all, but that resting Thornton is actually a big part of the plan for this season, right? That he's going to have a lot of games or a lot of practices that he doesn't show up to. They're mandatory for everybody else, but Jumbo's given the day off. Kind of, he needs that rest and recovery time. Finally realizing he's old, but you're right. I think anytime you keep his ice time down, he's going to contribute more in the ice time he has. Right, it'll be more quality minutes.
I'm going to give a shout out to Cody in the chat. He says he doesn't know what he's doing. That's all right. We don't either. So
yeah, right 15 episodes in and we still don't know what we're doing, Cody. So welcome to the party. All the way from Texas, I think.
Right on.
Yeah.
Closer to me than to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we wanted to talk about the keys to success over this 6-game run and really moving forward, hopefully. So the big one, they're 6-0 with Šimek in the lineup. That being said, I mean, how much credit do you give him? Is it just coincidence? Is it partially influenced by his return? What do you think?
So I give him a lot of credit for two reasons, and it's not necessarily his play, right. Although I think in one case it is his play. I think it's two big things. It's his pairing with Burns, I think, makes a big difference. So Šimek makes up for a lot of the Burns mistakes that we're used to seeing when Burns plays defense. And I mean, I think they were on display very well in the Detroit game. Burns has a tendency to get over aggressive or over excited or whatever you want to call it, and is out of place, isn't where he needs to be for defense. And Šimek does a good job of making up for that. So I think that solidified that pairing well. And I think this
tries to anyway, right? I was gonna say Detroit game, like you said, Burns got exposed about 3 times too many that game. But
yeah, I mean, in the OT, it's not Šimek's fault, right? There's no one that, like, he's not on the ice. It's Burns and two forwards. But the other thing is he's taking up minutes. So something that we didn't have before was we had Heed playing 9 minutes on the ice.
If he's lucky.
And that means Burns and Carlson are playing 26, 27 minutes.
Yeah.
That takes a lot out of guys. I mean, your best players at 27 minutes are going to be tired. They're going to make mistakes that are mental or physical. And I think Šimik being there and being able to eat up minutes, play 20 minutes in a game, allows those other guys to get more rest, and they're playing better when they're on the ice. I mean, Vlasic and we're going to talk about this in a second, but Vlasic and EK65, like, they're both playing better defense since he came back. Now, maybe it's hard to draw a direct correlation between those two, but I feel like part of it's got to be the fact that they're not playing as many minutes. They're not as tired. They're more mentally focused in the game.
No, I agree that time on ice is a huge factor. In fact, you look at the 6 guys they have in now, including Ferraro and Dylan. Pretty much every night they're all playing at least 15 minutes. A lot of the nights they're all playing 17, 18 minutes. In fact, I've seen some nights where Ferraro has actually played more than Vlasic, and same for Dylan. So it's really leveled out the minutes. I mean, sure, Carlson and Burns are going to have more time than the other 4, but if you look at the 4 after that, it's pretty even across the board, which does make a huge difference. I agree.
Sure. I mean, on power play, you're always going to have Carlson and Burns, or one or both of them out there, right? Yeah. I don't think it's ever going to change. But when you go to PK, I mean, I don't really want Burns on PK if I can avoid it.
No, unfortunately, he plays a lot on the PK, as does Carlson. But yeah, I would tend to agree with you that, well, Carlson is, but I prefer Burns to Carlson on the PK, but I'm not crazy about either. So,
but yeah, I think that's another good point. Looking at tonight's D pairings, right? We have, well, I guess last game too, we had Ferraro back.
Yes.
So we've got basically what I think will be our 6th defenseman, unless there's a trade that comes along.
Trade or injury, yeah.
Yeah, or major injury. But we've got what I think are the 6 defensemen we're going to be playing with, we're going to be rolling with. And it's nice to see that because it's the first time we've really seen these 6 guys play together. And they're pretty well divided for ice time, and they're all skilled defensemen. I mean, I know there's some argument over how skilled a defense Burns really is versus how much it's just that he's an offensive kind of powerhouse, but he does make stops. He does make good plays. They just tend to be aggressive plays. But I'm happy with the D pairings the way they are. I think getting those pairings set up is going to, in the long run, work a lot to our advantage. And you'll see, some of that where we blame Jones, there's also some blame on the defense. I think you might see some of those problems start slipping away, or at least not being as common. And we'll get a better look.
I mean, Jones has looked a lot better during this winning streak. His numbers look about the same. Unfortunately, a lot of that goes back to the games we were talking about where they gave up a bunch of goals late. Those games killed his save percentage, and I'm no Jones apologist by any stretch if you've ever listened to this show. But those, if there was ever an argument that save percentage is not representative of how he's played, just look at this winning streak. Over the longer haul, I don't agree with that argument, but in this last stretch of games, it has been certainly a valid point that he's played a lot better than his numbers show.
Well, and he had 2 shootouts, and he's 10 for 10 in his 2 shootouts.
Yeah. I mean, and you can't points right there that he pretty much won by himself.
Yeah, because it's 1-on-1. You can't blame anybody for a goal that goes in, and you can't credit anybody for stopping it other than him. So, I mean, I think that's, like you said, I think he's played a better game. He passes the eye test more than he used to, right? It's like the eye test is something you say. Yeah, there's times where they gave up a lot of goals, but if I'm seeing it as this was a collapse of defense that caused the goal, then I'm not blaming Jones for it. And I'm not seeing the soft goals we were seeing earlier in the season.
So just to wrap a bow around the defense pairings, we haven't talked about Carlson and Vlasic that much, but just to speak to how well they've done, they're both +9 during this winning streak. If you go back to prior to this winning streak, I believe Carlson was a -13 on the year. I think Vlasic was a -10.
10 or 11.
It's been a complete turnaround for both guys together. And I think we've talked about Vlasic quite a bit on this show, and how both you and I feel it's kind of a mental issue, his struggles over the last 2 years. And last year I was concerned about his attitude playing with Carlson. The new guy comes in, takes all the spotlight. Not that Vlasic wants spotlight, but I felt there might be some, I'm not going to say jealousy there, but some ill will. But he seems to, I think, now be relishing the fact that, okay, as you talked about on the last show, I'm on my team's top pair. I'm not playing third pair minutes, and I feel like he's been revitalized a bit and feeling like, okay, I'm a big part of the team once again.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's gonna have a lot to do with whether or not there's some attempt to trade him or some discussion around that. Is I think if he's playing on the top pair or one of the top two pairs, and he's playing well, I don't think that they necessarily are going to talk about it. I think they're going to try to keep Vlasic around. I think they might try to keep the D unit they have if they keep playing well.
Yeah, but there's no reason to change it right now. So
yeah, so I'm happy to see him playing. I mean, you know me, I'm a huge Vlasic fan. There were 2 jerseys I bought. Vlasic was my second one because McGinnis was my first, and he got traded as soon as it got delivered to my house. Or I think even before, didn't he get traded like the couple days before my jersey actually showed up? I don't think I ever got to wear the jersey where McGinn actually.
I remember you shouting across your cubicle at me when we were at work. So,
I mean, I like those types of players that are workhorses, that are maybe the guys that don't get as much credit, because Vlasic does play an amazing, or did play an amazing defensive game and is playing it again. He doesn't get the credit because he doesn't shoot a bunch of goals, so he'll never get a I'm blanking for some reason. He'll never be D-Man of the year, right? Like
Norris Trophy. Yeah.
Norris Trophy. He's never going to win a Norris Trophy because he can't score a ton of points, but he's always been a great defenseman. If he goes back to being that, I think I'm always happy to say that. I'll be glad to be wrong about his attitude problems. And maybe it was, and they worked it out. Maybe they had a talk. Who knows how that came about.
Oh, they seem to be vibing, which is a great thing for this team. So other keys of success, we talked about Jones playing better, talked about the defense and Šimić. The PK has continued to be the best in the NHL at over 90%. And then perhaps probably the biggest part of the win streak to me is their star players have played like star players. Primarily Hertl, Couture, and Timo. Hertl's got 6 goals, 9 points in the last 6 games. Couture just 2 goals, but does have 9 assists in the last 5 games, so 11 points in 5 games. And then Timo, 3 goals and 6 assists during the win streak as well. So all those guys are averaging more than a point a game, and they were not producing at all. And Hertl's been the one especially hot. I mean, he scored practically every game during this win streak other than against Detroit. So he's carried a lot of the weight, but it's good to see the frontline guys play like the frontline guys that they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, Couture and Hertl are the top of the points now, right? And I mean, that's good to see. Not that we don't love to see our defensemen up there, but I love seeing our star forwards be the guys who are driving points. I think
they have to be. I mean, that's how this team is built. We'll talk about it in the next segment. I mean, but the depth is not there on this team.
And I think Couture getting assists, that maybe as opposed to goals, like I'm never worried about that, because if he's getting an assist, then someone's getting a goal. And I think that may just be indicative of his new kind of role on the team, with like Pavelski gone and him playing where he's center on the first line and captaining and all that other stuff. And he's got a lot of good talent around him. Moving Kane to that line, he's got a great place to feed it. I don't know. I don't expect Couture. Maybe Logan won't get the number of goals we expect to see out of him, but if he's got the assists, I don't really care. I don't feel like that's a negative in any way.
Yeah, and Tyler in the chat gives a shout out to Kane. Absolutely, the reason I left Kane out of it is Kane's been fantastic all year, but he's continued to play well during this win streak as well. I mean, if you look at their best player all season,
it's Kane.
Would be Kane. I mean, Hertl has better numbers now because of his recent streak, but from beginning to end of the season, Kane's been the most consistent for sure.
Oh, for a while he was the only forward doing anything. So, and I agree. That's why I didn't mention him either, or didn't even think to bring him up. Is he's already been doing that, but seeing those other guys step up means we have more scoring options. We have more people providing goals and points there. But yeah, Kane has been great.
So those have been the sort of the keys to this win streak that, knock on wood, hopefully continues tonight. That being said, I was talking to Chad before the show that there's sort of this trend, I guess you can say in sports, but I know it's especially in hockey in general. When you're in the midst of a long losing streak, you tend to start to see signs of coming out of it, and you can tell when you're about to finally win a game. And the same can be said when you're on a win streak. You can start to see signs of fracture as the winning streak continues on. And I think the Sharks are kind of in that position right now. The reason I say that, if you look at their last two games versus Anaheim and Detroit, those are probably the poorest two games that they played of the 6 during this win streak. Ultimately, they still won, which is all that matters. And you certainly love to take 2 points on nights where you haven't played your best, but it's not trending in the right direction the last 2 games. The hope is that, they get back on track tonight after 2 days off rest. Playing the top team in their division should be ample motivation, but we'll see how that goes. So in terms of some of those fractures, what have you seen, Chad, in terms of some kind of concerns the last couple of games?
Yeah, and I'll caveat it with, nobody expects them to win the next 16 in a row, right? So, they're going to lose a game at some point. And some of the things that I think we're seeing is just that game against Detroit. I don't know what was going on, but it wasn't the same Sharks that showed up for the Nashville game or, really any of the other games in the series. Detroit looked like they were in charge most of that game.
Yeah.
Even though the scoreboard, Sharks win at the end. Like you said, that's what's important, is making it work and getting to that shootout and having Jones stick out, last for you in the shootout. That worked, but I don't want to rely on that too often. I don't want to say, well, as long as we get to the OT and the shootout, we'll be okay.
Especially,
I don't know,
tonight against division opponents, you don't want to give away points. So
I think, like I said, the thing that worries me more about that, because that's just a bad game, and you're going to have a bad game once in a while. The thing that worries me more is the not playing well from ahead. So getting up 4 goals or getting up 3 goals, and then
taking their foot off the gas.
Yeah, taking their foot off the gas, because I'd rather see us score 40 goals than see us try to play comfortably at 4 goals. Right? That's my biggest worry, is I never feel comfortable with the lead. And I don't know if that's just a mentality thing where they try to go out and protect a lead as opposed to winning a game. I definitely could see that. They do a lot more of jumping back and, don't take as many chances. But I think when they're playing their game at their speed, that's when they're the best team. And so I'd like to see that. Keep the foot on the gas when you're up, and don't play to keep your lead, play to actually win the game.
Yeah, I agree. That has been a concern. It's gotten better as they got through the win streak. The first couple of games on that win streak were real concerning at the end with Chicago and Minnesota. Edmonton, they let them back in a little bit, but not to that same extent. So we'll see how that goes. To me, though, the biggest concern is this team is very top heavy. If the guys we just talked about aren't producing, whether it's Logan, Hurdle, Timo, Kane, they're going to lose. And you can probably say that about most NHL teams, but if you go look at the teams that tend to go deep in the playoffs and go on to win the Stanley Cup, typically they have 3 or 4 lines that are scoring. It's not dependent on just 4 or 5 guys. Obviously, most teams don't have that luxury, but this team is certainly in that boat where if the big guys don't perform, they're not going to win.
Yeah, I'd like to see it's kind of hard to say because the lines have juggled some too, right? So Goodrow, who was your guy in the third line, is now on the second. You got Marlowe, Thornton, and Sorensen on that third line. I'd like to see more production from that third line. They have the talent there. If Marlowe and Jumbo don't know how to play hockey together, then nobody knows how to play hockey together. So I think they're okay. And then just Sorensen shows sparks of life. And in previous seasons, he's gone through scoring, I don't know what you want to call them, streaks, right? He can be streaky sometimes. So I'm hoping he wakes up and comes alive. And maybe it's just going to be a matter of luck where he becomes streaky when the top guys start dropping off a little bit.
And I agree with that. The third line is where they need vast improvement. The fourth line, you're not going to expect much from. I mean, anything you get from them is gravy for the most part. But they need that third line to be better. In fact, part of what helped them get to the conference finals last year is that third line was significantly better than most of the third lines they played, especially Colorado in particular. So, I mean, the depth, ultimately, I think Doug Wilson's going to have to add at the deadline because I'm not sure they're going to get the production they need with the current roster they have. I mean, like you said, Goodrow's on the second line, which is not where he should be, even though he's played well. Nothing against him. It's just not the position that he should be in.
No, I mean, I think with the choices you have, he's earned that position. I think he's better there than any of your other options. But yeah, I agree. He should be a good third line winger. But that means you need a second line winger to take his place. And no one's shown to be that. In that fourth line, it's not their fault. I mean, it's a lot of young kids, right? We're rotating a bunch of young players throughout that fourth line, trying to find something that works well. But you're not going to be able to count on that this season as being a line that saves you or keeps you in a game.
Yeah.
Really, you're just looking for a line that doesn't mess up. You're looking for a fourth line that can go up, eat some ice time, rest your other guys, and not create scoring opportunities for the other team.
In fact, that was one of the things that we talked about with Martel last show, is that even though his offensive production has cooled down since that first game, you look at him, he's one of the few pluses on the team, which speaks to what you just said about kind of defensive responsibility and not being a liability, even if you're not scoring. So more of that for sure. The last concern we'll talk about, the power play. Well, we can talk about that too, but I was going to let Burnsy slide like he likes to slide on the ice. But no, Burns is a team worst, -16. His last game against Detroit was probably the worst game he's played all year. So he's got to get back on track. They need him, obviously, to be better. And
you can try and chalk that up to, like we talked about last time, some of that you can chalk up to time on ice. But at this point, he's playing the same time on ice as Karlsson, and Karlsson's a -4. Yeah. So, I mean, Burns is clearly there's more.
Thanks to the last 6 games where he's a +9.
Exactly. But I'm just saying, if we're talking about people who haven't turned around yet, I think Burns' defensive play hasn't turned around yet. I think it was really weird in Detroit because they benched Timo after the goal.
Yeah, I was worried at the time he was injured. I was glad to find out later it was just a coaching decision, even though I think it was a bad decision. But
sure, I think you play Timo because he's too good of a player for you to be like, oh, you made a mistake. Well, you're going to sit the bench now. And if you're going to do that, then you got to do it to Burns at some point because there's no other example of a great player who makes stupid defensive choices repeatedly than Brent Burns.
There's like a handful of guys on the roster that are immune to coaching. I guess Burns, Karlsson, Thornton, Hurdle, Logan. That's everybody else is benchable according to DeBoer, and not that I would suggest benching any of those guys, but
no.
Anyway, so the power play was the other thing.
Yes,
if you go back in the month of November, they are 4 for 25 on the power play, which is 16% compared to the 21% that they have for the season as a whole. And 2 of those goals have come in the last 2 games. So if you take those out, I mean, you're 2 for the last, 20 something. So it's cooled down. They've tried putting Burns and Karlsson out there together. Occasionally it hasn't really made much difference. I will say it was nice to see Karlsson finally get a power play goal last game. He's got an incredible shot. He just hasn't gotten it on net consistently in those opportunities. So it was nice to finally see one going, and maybe that opens things up because I'm not sure other teams are respecting his shot, and they tend to just float to the wings, take away Couture and LeBanc. Whereas if you have that point man up top shooting more often, whether it's Burns or Karlsson, then I think that'll lead to positive things.
And just a programming note, we apparently have our first European viewer, so we're now an international podcast, International Sharks podcast. So, yeah, I agree. I think they're going to keep playing with that slot position, right? Like they're going to keep putting Karlsson and Burns on the ice at the same time. They seem to do it kind of every other power play. So they'll try it. If it doesn't work, the next power play, they split them up again. They keep hoping it works. I've yet to see it really be a good pairing unless you've noticed something different, but I don't think it's generating a lot more opportunity than just playing it the way.
It's good to try it every once in a while just to mix it up because it does give the opponent a different look. Because if they stick to their two traditional setups, their system is basically identical for both units. I mean, it's different guys out there executing it, but the system is the same, and the way they move the puck around is different when those two guys are on the ice. So it helps give a different look, but it hasn't necessarily clicked yet.
I think it's funny that our power play, for a while, our power play was looking good, and the team wasn't doing well. Now the team's doing well, and the power play doesn't look good again. I don't know if it's we have some inverse relationship between how we play 5-on-5 and how we play on the power play.
Well, I mean, maybe it's the fact that, okay, when they're not scoring on the power play, they know they've got to step it up 5-on-5, whereas before their 5-on-5 was terrible, and the only time they were scoring was the power play. So I don't know. It would be nice to have it all clicking at once, but it never works that way, right?
Yeah.
All right. I want to hit on a question that Steve had in the chat room before we move to our next topic. So Steve asked, is the captaincy too heavy on Logan? Meaning, is it causing Logan to perform below expectations? What are your thoughts on that?
So I thought it was the beginning of the season. I mean, I think I said it the last podcast. Either he's gotten over it or that wasn't the issue. But I do think he's maybe coming more into that position. I know that we try to say it's not a big deal because you have so many big personalities. You have Marlowe, you have Jumbo, right? Like, it's not like there's a ton of weight on Logan to do it all by himself. But I do think there's a feeling of responsibility there, whether it's actually there or not. You feel with that C on your chest that you need to be the guy who steps up, the guy who does stuff. And I wonder if some of it was he felt he needed to be the guy to rescue every game. That kind of pressure on yourself is gonna cause problems for a guy who naturally does that anyways.
Well, that's what I was saying. I mean, if there's anyone on this team that takes pride in his game and puts as much pressure on himself and is critical of himself more than anyone, it's Logan, without a doubt. And that's probably a large reason why they named him captain, is because he's accountable. But it can also turn into a negative, to your point.
Yeah, I think he's either getting used to it. I think would probably be the most likely answer, honestly, is that he's learning that the role is a little different than his old role, right? He could kind of be less in, not that he was never the guy they focused on, but I mean, with Pavs around, you had a guy that was always interviewed, that was always in front of the camera, that was always out there and in the public, and Pavelski really rose to that. And I think that Logan was kind of the guy who was a little more behind the scenes, but able to come up and be clutch when he needed to be.
Yeah, and I mean, Logan will be vocal in the media, but he's not a vocal guy in the locker room. And That's obviously, we haven't been in the locker room. We don't know that, but that's what others have said, that he's a lead by example type guy. I wouldn't say he's a Patrick Marleau in terms of being that quiet, but he's not a guy that's going to call people out in the locker room typically. He'll share his honest opinion when he's asked a question, but he's not a rah type guy.
Although I did like when, there were some digs on him for bad-mouthing some of his teammates in the media, but the guys even came out and said, hey, he told us to our faces before he came out and said it to the media, right? And I think that's good. I think he's learning that role. Like, I'm not going to say anything out there that I wouldn't say to you in the locker room, and I'm going to say it to you in the locker room because that's my role now. That's part of my job.
Yeah. So, me personally, I don't know. I can go both ways on this, but I chalk up the beginning of the season to the whole team just sucking. I have a hard time looking at individual performance when the entire team was miserable. I mean, other than Kane, who was gone for the first 2 games. Was it 3 games, 2 games? I don't remember now, but 2 games. I mean, the whole team was terrible. So I just chalk that up to the team getting off to a slow start. I don't think it had anything to do with Logan or the captaincy or anything like that. But I do think, as we've talked about, I mean, like I said, he is a guy that has a lot of pride. He puts a lot of pressure on himself. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he has thought about it. I don't know if it's affected him tremendously. Obviously, the points are starting to come now. The goals still aren't quite there, although he's hit a few posts. And I think you even maybe touched on it earlier. He tends to be streaky with his goals. So don't be surprised if he's the next guy to carry this team over the next week or two, like Hurdle has for the last couple of weeks and like Kane has for the rest of the season.
So let's talk about that the fourth line for a little bit here, because I think that's the big question mark. You might see guys move between the second and third line, or first and second line a little bit, but I think at this point, unless we have some sort of trade or some sort of acquisition, your top 9 forwards are probably your top 9 forwards. I don't think there's many people.
Yeah, I mean, they may shuffle in and out, right, as far as who's on what line, but I agree with you. Before we talk about fourth line options, I just want to take a moment of silence for Michael Haley's career and the fact that he is not claimed on waivers by the Sharks again. Thank the Lord Jesus Christ for that. Can we
Careful.
just all...
Hey, hold on. We have some Haley fans in the audience, all right? So let's not... But yeah, that yours and my immediate reaction to Haley being on waivers or clearing waivers was, oh God, please, Doug Wilson, don't.
I think that was 90% of Sharks fans on Twitter. But I think, did you see Kurz's tweet where Kurz said, I might have deleted my Twitter if the Sharks claimed Haley. So that kind of summed it up perfectly, I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw some comments that were like, it's nothing against Haley. He's just he's not what we need right now. And I would agree with that. Even if you like Haley, he's not a top 3 or top 9 forward really, and he's not bringing scoring to the fourth line. I'm not sure he's someone we need. I'm not sure his skills are what we're looking for.
The only positive I'll say about him, he's a wonderful human being, at least as far as we know, and he'll stick up for teammates. So you can never dislike a guy for that, but the issue was the use of him by DeBoer, right? I mean, Haley wasn't the problem. It was the fact that DeBoer wanted to play him every single night, despite having better options available to him, including Donskoy in the playoffs.
And I worry about that with Prout, honestly. And seeing him come back from a concussion, and the first thing that happens is he gets into a fight. And I get it. That's part of his role. That's part of why he's there. But let's have the guy who just came back from concussion. Maybe let's give him a few days off of getting punched in the face before.
Ultimately he made the decision to fight, but
sure.
And we don't even know that the fight re-aggravated. I'm assuming it did, most likely. But
it's upper body
injury. He got in a fight the first game, got a concussion, and yeah. So.
And that might be. I mean, honestly, that might be a problem for Prout if
that's the one thing you do and you can't do it anymore, then how are you going to stick around?
Some guys become concussion susceptible, right? Like they become, they get to the point where every bang on the head is going to give you a concussion. Yeah. And if your job is to go out there and be physical and to get in fights, and that's the way you are, I mean, that could spell the end of your career. Yeah. And I think with our D core now, we don't need him in there necessarily, but it's sad to see that happen. I don't like seeing any guy get a concussion. And I don't like seeing it repeatedly.
The one that tore me up was Ryan Clough, who was one of my favorite Sharks of all time. And his career ended because of concussions. Even his coaching career after that has ended, at least. It's been delayed and postponed, and he's been in and out of coaching because of it as well, which, I mean, that shows you how serious it is that he's not even playing anymore, and it's still recurring.
So that brings up – so I'm going to go off script for a minute because that brings up another thing that I – came up this last week, and that's kind of the stoppage in play for injuries. It wasn't in a Sharks game, so you have to kind of be watching the NHL outside of that. But
Colorado, Vancouver,
the Avs, Avs Vancouver. One of the Avs takes a puck to the face or puck to the head. I mean, he goes down immediately. There's blood coming from his helmet. The Vancouver player is waving at a ref, trying to get them to blow a whistle.
I didn't see that part.
He's pointing at them and raising his hand and pointing, trying to get the ref to blow a whistle. No whistles blown because the rules are, as long as Vancouver has the puck, they don't blow the whistle dead, right? As soon as the Avs get the puck, they'll blow the whistle dead. So Vancouver ends up scoring, but you've got a guy whose head is bleeding, not able to get up. He tries multiple times to get up and falls back down, goes back down to the ice. If we're going to talk about concussions and, worrying about head injury, I mean, how do we not make this a rule? If you're hit in the head and you go down, let's just blow the whistle dead. You can give the puck back to the other team at the face-off if you want, but if a guy goes down from a shot to the head, I feel like that should be an immediate stop.
Well, I know right now it's a judgment call, essentially, because basically they don't want a scoring chance to be taken away when a guy isn't in an urgent situation, right? In fact, I think about the NFL. A lot of times at the end of a game, you'll see guys intentionally go down to stop the clock because their team needs a timeout. And that's the type of thing they're trying to avoid. But I think in that situation, I don't even necessarily want a rule change. It's just the referee's got to have better awareness than that. I mean, unless he's blind and can't see that the guy's gushing blood out of his face. I mean, I don't know what
my understanding was
comments were, but
yeah, my understanding was it wasn't like, and I've seen the video, it's not pouring out of his face or anything like, so he may not have seen the blood on the ice, but I mean, the effing guy on the other team is trying to signal you that something's wrong, right? I'm sure now I've seen arguments that, well, Vancouver could just pass it to a Colorado player and that would end it immediately.
Right.
And it could, and maybe that's something players should take into consideration. But at the same time, you're taught to play to the whistle. I mean, that's just how you play.
Yeah. And we're leaving out the fact, by the way, they scored the tying goal because of this. And took the game in overtime. They lost in overtime, but they got a point because of it.
Yeah. But I think you could modify the rule a bit, right? Make it easier take a little bit of that judgment out of the ref's hands, make it easier for them to make that call. And at the same time say, hey, look, if people are faking injury, I mean, that's a penalty. Then you get to go on the power play and assess fines, or you could add some sort of,
right. I mean, the NBA does fines for flopping, right? So
yeah. I mean, you have an embellishment penalty already, so give them an embellishment, and then fine them for faking an injury like that. But it's like, could you imagine when Pavs went down if they hadn't blown a whistle, if they just kept playing because like the other team had the puck? I mean, and I guess Colorado, it's even worse because they had another player like a week ago that broke a jaw, took a puck and broke their jaw and went down, and they kept playing on that game too. But I don't know. I don't know if everybody was aware of that. That's my spiel, like my soapbox for head injuries. If we're going to be serious about it, like,
well, I mean, we can do a whole show on the NHL and concussion, but I'll just say this: the reality is they don't give two shits about it as much as they want to pretend they do.
Well, I love Vlasic, right? Who basically said it doesn't matter if you have a concussion or not; you can pass the protocol if you want to. Like, I mean, that it's the players know it's a joke too. If they want to play, they'll just pass protocols.
And it's a joke in every sport. I mean, I think the NFL's gone the farthest in terms of trying to aid against it, rightfully so, because they have the biggest issue, but all the sports can do a better job. All right, getting back on track. So we want to talk about what's that?
We're talking about fourth lines. Did we talk about that already?
No, we didn't. So the fourth line's kind of been a constant turnpike this season. Gambrell and Carlson have been pretty steady on the fourth line, at least the last couple of weeks. So really it's one spot that is constantly rotated out. We've seen Bergman on there. We've seen Gregor, who I don't understand why Sharks fans on Twitter have a fascination with. Nothing against him. I don't think he's a bad player, but he has 0 points in 10 games, yet people think he's the savior. There's Gregor, Radil, who we all dislike for obvious reasons. Your Tyken had some time on there. Brodzinski, who apparently is hurt again. And then Suomela got called up today. I don't think he's going to be in the lineup tonight, but we might see him at some point here in the next couple of days. So I guess the question is, who would you like to see get a shot on that fourth line?
I mean, I want to see Brodzinski on the fourth line. He's injured again, I guess, apparently. But so Radil's had probably the most games.
Radil and Gregor for sure, yeah.
Radil's got 12 games with 0 points.
Yeah.
Gregor's got 10 games with 0 points. You're taking has 4 games with 0 points. You know, I don't understand what Brodzinski has 3 games with 1 point.
Yeah, and to what you said earlier, I was going to say to your point, but no pun intended. You're not going to judge fourth liners off points, but at the same time, if you're not noticing any contribution elsewhere, that's where you're going to look. So if you're not producing points, you got to be doing something else. And those guys haven't done much else from what I've observed anyway.
No, and they don't. I mean, they're
not killing penalties. They're not overly physical.
They're all negative in the plus minus.
Right.
They're all playing less than 10 minutes. Taken played 13. I averaged 13, but he only played 4 games, so that's hard to really.
Some of the games he was playing first and second line. So,
yeah. But Radil and Gregor have like less than 10 minutes average. I don't understand why. Like again, we've talked about this before. We swear there's a Pete DeBoer doghouse, and we're not sure how they decide who goes in that doghouse. Some people cannot be put in it, and some people are in it all the time. So Brodzinski's played 3 games. I don't think he's ever played 2 games in a row, has he? Like they bring up.
He's never, I don't think, played a regular season game above the 4th line.
Yeah.
So in preseason, he played with Jumbo quite often and had a couple of good games with Jumbo.
He comes in, plays 1 game, back in doghouse. Radil, meanwhile, hasn't had a good game and can't get put in the doghouse to save his life. I don't know if he's related to Pete DeBoer. I don't know if he's dating his daughter. I don't know what it is. But
and this is a history. I mean, we've seen this with Tim Heed. We've seen it with Joachim Ryan. We've seen it with Jonas Donskoy. Donskoy was a healthy scratch several times, and now he's killing it with Colorado. Not that I think he would have done that here. But to your point, DeBoer, once he's put someone in that position, it's damn near impossible to get out of it, seemingly. And then on the other hand, he's got favorites who he will not go away from, whether it's Michael Haley, whether it's Dalton Prout, whether it's Radil. Melker, I can understand more because he's a great penalty killer. And I think the sort of trend that I've seen for the guys he likes are people he views as physical. He clearly has a blind spot for guys who are physical. In fact, that's what he referenced with Radil playing in the Anaheim game, is that he's a bigger body. It's the same thing he said about Prout. So he's got a fascination with size and toughness, which I think Doug Wilson does to an extent as well. But yeah, I don't understand and maybe, it's the opposite of that for the guys that are in his doghouse, because Ryan and Heed are probably the least physical defensemen the Sharks had at the time, that they were on the roster. Brodzinski, he's kind of middle of the road in terms of physicality, but maybe that's the thing, is that guys that Donskoy is certainly not a physical player. So maybe that's the trend.
Yeah. I don't know. Especially 4th line. I think he likes a physical guy he likes that 4th line to go out and be big guys who bump people around, I guess.
I mean, the problem is that's such a 20th century view. Like, that is not the modern age of hockey. Certainly in the 90s, early 2000s, that was definitely the trend with 4th lines. Hockey was a much rough and tough sport. Now it's all about speed and skill. And if you have a 4th line that can skate circles around the other team, you're going to benefit from it. And they've gotten more open to that idea, but they're still stuck in the past with that concept, I think.
And let's be clear, that's not to say that like there isn't room for physicality in the game. I mean, there certainly is. But like Hurdle's a big physical player, but he's got skill, right?
And you don't think of him as someone who's going to check people, but he's strong on the puck, and he's impossible to get the puck off.
And Dylan is a physical player, and will even take a fight. I mean, he has no problems throwing gloves.
Good,
but he also brings good defense to the game. So you can't put a guy on the line just because he's physical. Right. You've got to find a guy who's got some skill to back it up. Yeah. Because we need 3 good lines at least, but preferably you need to run 4 lines. He talks about it too. He gives it lip service all the time. He talks about.
He does, but then he never plays 4 lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that I want to see the 4th line play more, but I would just like to see them not so concerned with physicality. But outside of Brodzinski, ironically, the one guy I wanted to see get a shot was Suomela, who got called up. Hopefully he gets into a game or 2. I don't know that he will, given his fascination with Radil, but I liked Suomela a lot at the beginning of last year. His game tapered off. He ended up playing like 25 games with the Sharks. He played more than people realize. In fact, coming out of camp, he was their 3rd line center last year, and he looked very good early in the year. I believe he was playing with Kane and Donskoy at that time. So I liked him a lot. The thing that hurt him is when he got sent down, he was not good at all with the Barracuda last year, and they didn't take well to that as an organization, and nor should they. But he's gone on a recent hot streak with the Barracuda the last couple of games, so hopefully he gets in there eventually. But he could. I wouldn't mind seeing him. I know Gambrell has looked good as a center, but I wouldn't mind seeing Gambrell get another shot on the wing, either on the third or second line, and then you could put Suomela in as the fourth line center. At least gives your lineup more flexibility, and if God forbid, Thornton, Hurdle, or Couture go down, you're going to need someone like Suomela to step in and be a center.
Yeah.
And I think he's more capable of carrying a third line center role than Gambrell is personally.
And I don't know, like you have True and Kelman on here as well as just kind of showing stats like leaders on the Barracuda. And
Yeah.
I haven't watched the Barracuda play. I'm gonna be honest.
I haven't either.
So I don't know if Steve's still online. I know he knows a little more about what's going on with the Barracuda than we do. But at this point, your fourth line's not really doing much of anything.
No.
So I don't mind pulling up any of these guys to give them a shot at the fourth line, even for just a game. Maybe you pull one up and they're just terrible and you go, okay, that was a mistake. But
Yeah.
I mean, he does weird shuffles with the top three lines all the time. Like, bring up some of these new guys and let them play a little bit in the NHL. You never know when one might step up and really, take the opportunity to do something.
Yeah. So True, I think, is like 6'5", 6'5". He's a big dude.
It's a big guy.
He was one of the guys they were looking at for fourth line center coming out of the preseason, but he had a pretty miserable preseason. I think he led the Barracuda in scoring last year other than Gambrell. Joel Kelman was a European free agent, kind of similar to Radil, I think a little bit younger, but a European free agent, not a draft pick. And then the other guys on our list we've already seen play this year in terms of Radil, Gregor, Bergman, Yurtaikin, Bredzinski. I like Bergman. He probably had the best preseason of all of them. I wouldn't mind seeing him get another shot. He was doing very well with Barracuda. They called him back up for one game, then sent him right back out, which, again, to your point, a guy like him gets one game to prove himself, whereas Radil gets 10 games. Gregor gets 10 games, and they're not really showing much of anything. So I just don't understand the logic behind some of these decisions, but
he's also got a point, by the way.
What's that?
Bergman's also got a point.
Hey, more than we can say about most of the other guys.
Yeah, exactly.
And he had a great preseason. Radil didn't do shit in the preseason. So
I don't know if it's just because Radil did have a great run for part of last year. And I don't know if it's just the expectation that you're waiting for that to come back around and, him to shake off whatever rust or whatever's keeping him from being that way. But at some point, maybe you send a message to him by sending him down and saying, you play down here for a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So closing off tonight's game, we have a game in an hour?
An hour. Yep.
Against the Edmonton Oilers. Are you going to be able to stay up that late? I know you're getting old and it's late in Nashville.
I will. Thankfully, I have a closing shift tomorrow, so I can sleep in tomorrow. But the other 9:30, and really this is a 9:45 game because of national TV. It won't start till 9:45 and 9:48 here. But no, those games have been rough to wake up the next day, but I managed to do it. So, but yeah, so tonight the Sharks play the Connor McDavids, otherwise known as the Edmonton Oilers. The story of this team is, if you have ever seen a one-line team in hockey, this is the definition of that. And it's not just McDavid. His line mate Draisaitl is a tremendous player as well. In fact, he's outscoring McDavid, I believe. I don't have the numbers on what percentage of goals those guys have accounted for, but all you need to go is pull up their team stats. McDavid and Draisaitl have 40-plus points. The rest of the roster is around 10. James Neal has like 12 goals, but if you take him out, pretty much nobody after that has been significant other than McDavid, Draisaitl, and Cassian, who plays on their line. So obviously that's the key to the game. Is I don't think you're going to shut those guys down. If you do, more power to you, but really it's just limiting their impact, right? I mean, I think this kind of demonstrates how dependent they are. If you hold them to 2 goals, you probably win. That's how dependent they are. You're muted. There you go. You're back.
I had to sneeze, so I muted, and then I forgot to unmute. So, last game against the Oilers, McDavid had 1 shot on goal. If you can do that, I think you can shut down the team for the most part. I mean, you can definitely slow them down a lot. Nugent Hopkins and Neal aren't terrible. But they're not great players, right? You're just focusing on the one line.
Yeah, you're not worried about those two guys, but you're worried about McDavid and Draisaitl.
So I expect to see Carlson and Vlasic on whenever McDavid and Draisaitl are on,
as much as possible.
As possible. What are your predictions? I know we talked about this a little bit beforehand, and you think Edmonton's going to be a little wired up from the loss.
They should be motivated after getting a spanking courtesy of the Sharks last Tuesday, so a week ago today. And really the last couple of years after the playoff defeat that Edmonton handed San Jose when McClellan was still the head coach for the Oilers, the Sharks have taken it to them the last two regular seasons. I think I read an article by some Edmonton hockey scribe the other day that Edmonton got 1 point in 5 games against the Sharks last year. So they know this is a team they need to beat. So I think we'll definitely see a much better effort from Edmonton. And then my other sort of negative on this one is what we talked about earlier. 6-game win streak. Like you said, they're going to lose at some point. The last 2 games have been their worst 2 games in the streak. So it's not trending in the right direction. You put those two things together, it's not a great recipe for success. That being said, I think the Sharks are a far superior team to Edmonton. In the long run, I don't see Edmonton being a threat whatsoever. But as far as tonight is concerned, I'm a little apprehensive.
Yeah. So I'll do the first score prediction. So I think the Sharks win it. I think, though, McDavid gets a hat trick. I think it's like 5-4 Sharks, which I would, I'll feel bad that he gets a hat trick and loses the game. I won't feel bad because I'm a Sharks fan.
Hey, you can have 10 goals as long as we win. I don't really care.
I think it's going to be 5-4. I think most of your points are going to come from that McDavid line. He's going to take it personally to try to score on the Sharks, especially if I was him and I got kept to 1 shot on goal, I would come out just as a madman tonight. But I think that in the end, we'll pull together and get some good team scoring, hopefully, like we've been doing,
Yeah. And I don't know if the Oilers have Smith or Koskinen in a net tonight, but Mike Smith historically has the Sharks number. He certainly didn't last week when they put up 6 goals on him, but that's another factor to look at. Smith, even though he's at the tail end of his career, historically has played outstanding in San Jose.
Yeah, it's hard to say. They're not really playing a starter backup. They're kind of splitting games between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, neither of them are worthy of a starting job in the NHL at this point, honestly.
After Smith's, I mean, so if you're the Oilers coach, after seeing Smith last time against the Sharks, would you put in Koskinen?
I would look more at their last few games as opposed to the last Shark game, and I haven't followed them the last few games, but I would base it more off that than the last game in San Jose. But I would tend to lean towards Smith just because of his historical success versus Sharks, primarily when he was with Arizona, but Dallas to a lesser extent as well. So my prediction, I'm going to stay positive. I'll say the Sharks win 4-3. I agree with you. It'll be a close game. It won't be a blowout or a runaway laugher like it was last week. But I think they will be tested tonight. I will not be surprised at all if the winning streak comes to an end. Like I said, it's going to sometime soon.
Yeah, and 6 is a respectable streak. I mean, that's a lot of games to put together.
And you can look at it and say 1 game at a time, but I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Like when you're on a streak, you're on a streak. You're not sure you're focused on the task at hand, but in the back of your head, you're going to lose at some point. And regardless of streak, you're going to lose games. But yeah, they're due for a loss. So if they do lose, I guess the message is don't panic. It's inevitable they're going to lose a game. The big thing will be once they do lose a game, how do they respond, right? Do they get right back on the winning track, or do they sputter and drop 2 or 3 in a row and then they're back in a hole again?
Well, and looking ahead, I mean, they've got Vegas after this.
Yeah, that's what makes tonight's game important. I mean, Vegas has not been good lately up until they killed Calgary 6-0 last game, but before that they lost 5 in a row. So they're catching Vegas probably at the right time, although they're pretty pissed off as they showed last game. But that, to me, well, 2 reasons this game's important. Number one, it's a division game. You're facing the top team in the division in terms of points. And then, like you said, they play Vegas on Thursday, so you don't want to drop 2 in a row to two division opponents.
But after that, I feel like they've got a pretty good chance of stringing together some wins. I mean, you got the Islanders. You got two
Islanders
games.
have had a great year, but it's at home, so
Yeah. Well, they're not doing great right now, are they?
they were off to a great start. I don't know.
They're like the worst in the East right now.
New Jersey, yes.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong. Yeah.
New Jersey. No, the Islanders have been
That
one
makes
of the Cinderella stories again this year. But
I
mean, after they play LA twice, they play Winnipeg, who struggled this year, and the bulk of those games are at home. The only road games are Vegas, LA, and then they have a road game in Arizona to close out the month.
But you know what that means? All these home games together means we're in for some terrible road stretch.
Well, you look, so December they start with like a 5-game trip out east, and then most of the rest of December after that is at home. It's January where they are primarily on the road in January, if I remember right.
Yeah, January is 7 of 11 games are on the road.
Yeah, in fact, Randy said it the other night that this November is the most home games they've ever had a month in franchise history. Yeah. So they've, to their credit, after dropping the first 2 at home, they have made progress when they needed to. I mean, this was the time of the year to either pull away from the pack or get back in the race. So they have done that. And then you continue to do it the next 6 weeks, or will probably determine the fate of their season in terms of playoff or not.
All right. Well, we're gonna check back in a couple weeks and let you know how they're doing. I mean, you'll already know how they're doing, but we'll tell you why we think they're doing how they're doing. And hopefully they listen to this real quick before they go into the game and keep the win streak alive. Any last thoughts, Nolan?
Just cross your fingers that St. Louis and Tampa Bay do not go to overtime or shootout and delay our broadcast.
Our broadcast even further. Yeah. All right. I'm off to eat dinner and then watch the game. Everybody enjoy the game. Check us out, like I said, at Sharks Talk 916 on Twitter. We usually are tweeting during games. Lately, it's been Nolan doing most of the heavy lifting.
You're in charge tonight. I'm giving you that responsibility.
Okay. It may be a light night for Twitter. We'll see how the wife does. And then you can check us out on Facebook at Sports Talk 916 Network or online sportstalk916.com. Thanks for joining, guys. And do us a favor. If you like the show, give us a review. If you don't like the show, don't give us a review. And everybody tell your friends to listen. All right. Bye.
See you.